Okay, I'm Dawn Poulos. I am from Mattermark, and I head up marketing for the company. And I like to think I have the most awesome job in the world because every day I report to and get to work with Daniel Morrill, who is the CEO and founder of Mattermark, and she's just awesome and terrific. And at Mattermark, what we do is we collect and organize the world's private business information. And we started out in the venture world, selling into VCs for them to find the next hot company, the next big investment. And what they noticed is that, this is something our portfolio companies could use. And then we started selling into the sales and marketing segment, and now we're finding that most of our customers now are from those segments. So we still sell into the VC, but really a lot of what's coming in right now is sales. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I want you to know I'm going to be using Mattermark data, but this is not a sales pitch. This is just about using data. It's about using growth signals to cut through the noise, okay? And so if anyone has any questions as I go through this, I just want you to raise your hand, ask questions, interrupt me, do whatever you want, because that makes it always more interesting, okay? I only have one goal today, and I hope I reach it. And that is to figure out how we find and we sell to high-growth B2B SaaS companies. Is everyone interested in that? Do people want to sell to high-growth B2B companies? Okay, good, because I want to make sure I have the right subject matter here. And at Mattermark, I always kind of have this sense of urgency. I'm not known as the person who smiles a lot. I make fun of a lot of people, but what I try to do is I always consider this is a fast-moving market, and there's a lot of balls in the air, and there's a lot of plates spinning, and I always have a very high sense of urgency when we're doing things. And the reason I think that we need to have that level of urgency is let's talk about kind of the recent history. Let's talk about what's going on with SaaS multiples because they're crazy, okay? They're really crazy. In 2008, the Lehman Brothers imploded, the economy imploded, but things got better, and we thought we knew what was going on, and we thought we knew how the world was working. But in 2014, the rules seemed to completely change. Valuations went sky high. They went crazy. They didn't even make sense. And it peaked around, I think it peaked around early 2015, and it continued out throughout the summer. And then what happened is you saw some concerns last summer. You saw valuations. There's a lot of chatter in the venture market. And you saw valuations come down a little bit. You saw a longer time for things to get funded, okay? And then, but the market didn't really feel that. But then in February, we kind of had this oh crap moment, right? It just hit us like crazy. LinkedIn, it fell. Does everyone remember that? And you know what? That was pretty reasonable given their multiples compared to their revenue. But then Tableau had a small hit, right? But the drop was jaw-dropping, right? And then all of a sudden, Salesforce, who just blew out the quarter like they always blow out the quarter, dropped. And so everything went absolutely crazy. But then it went up. And so we thought, so we're kind of back to the 2014 levels. But what's going on, you can see we're back to Q4 2015. We're getting back up there. But as Mattermark, does anyone here read the Mattermark Daily? Few people, but as we reported yesterday, we finally have enough data coming in to talk about valuations and to talk about funding. And for Q1 2016, and Tamaz is going to talk a lot about this, I assume, so I'm not going to get into it. But volume, while deal volume was up, total capital deployed was down 11% for the first quarter of 2016. So I think it probably puts a little bit of a worry, but it's something to start thinking about. And so I wanted to use that as a background, and now we're going to start talking about growth signals, okay? We're going to be talking about data. We're going to be talking about using data to find companies. And I love using Slack as an example because it's such an extreme example, right? So it's such a great one to use. And the point I'm trying to make here is you want to get in early, and you want to use signals to find that data. So if you look at this slide, what I did was I took Slack's employee growth rate that they've always made public. Slack's great because they make everything public. And I plotted it against what we call a growth score. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to be talking about growth score. And if you look at it, everyone knows where Slack is now. 800,000 users, 65 million ARR. And everyone is right now competing to get a piece of Slack. And it's absolutely brutal, right? When did you want to know about Slack? You wanted to know about them back in April, in 2014. That's when you wanted to know about them. In April of 2014, they were 10 weeks out of beta, right? And that's when social capital came along. And social capital, you know what they saw? They understood those growth signals. And they invested. They invested at what, I don't know, 40 million, 25, 250 pre. It's now valued at 3.8 billion. So that's really, not that we all like to make 3.8 billion, but the point that I'm trying to make here is you want to find a company, you want to use data, you want to use growth signals to find that company back when the growth is low, back when people don't know about it. And you want to be able to ride that growth, you want to be able to ride that tail, because growth is a lever. Because you think about it, what's your most important metric? It's MRR. And you want to be able to find those growth companies, you want to be able to grow with it. And you're not going to be able to do that without data. Okay? All making sense so far? All right. So let's talk about that new reality. The new reality is really simple. You know, volume is down with deals. And the reality is super simple. You just have to have metrics to back up what you do. You never used to, right? You used to say, I'm going to grow really big, and you used to get this huge valuation. And it doesn't work like that anymore. You need to have metrics to get your money. You have to have metrics to prove your valuation. And you have to start thinking about something that people have never thought about before, and that's profitability. All right? So you can't go putting big platinum polar bears in your lobby anymore. You have to start thinking about, how am I going to make money? All right? And that puts a whole lot of pressure on a company. And it puts a whole lot of pressure on one, and specifically one person's on the hook for it, and that's the VP of sales. Anyone in sales here? Okay, so that puts them on the hook. We had Jason Lumpkin and Daniel Morrill had a great webinar a couple weeks ago, and they talked about the VP of sales. They say when you bring in a new VP of sales, they have exactly one sales cycle to get that lead per revenue up. If they can't do that, you need to get them the hell out of there. And that's a very important thing to think about, okay? And there's a term floating around for this right now, and it's called account-based marketing and account-based sales. Has anyone heard of that? Okay. So that's a very, and it's about no longer going out after a whole big bunch of leads. In a nutshell, it's about going spear gun fishing as opposed to throwing out a net. It's finding very specific accounts that you want to go after. And you can't do that without data. You can all talk about it, but if you don't have data to find what you want and to find those accounts, you're never going to be able to, and if you don't use growth signals to find every piece of the funnel, you're not going to be able to get that. So what you want to do is you want to use signals to understand your quality of prospecting, your AE efficiency, and your customer success. Because customer success needs to be on the hook for revenue. It really does. Okay? And so to get there is a very, very long and complex formula. Okay? So I want everyone to get out their notes, get out their computers, and I want you to look at this formula. Okay? That's what you need to do, okay? You need to identify your best customers, and then you need to find growth signals. You need to use growth signals to find people just like them. It's as easy as that. You need to cut through the noise, okay? And using your customers to cut through that noise is the best way to do things, okay? So let me tell you I always like to look at the top of the funnel. To me, the top of the funnel is the most important thing because SDRs, sales development reps, BDRs, whatever you want to call them, inside sales, they spend 50% of their time wasted on prospecting, on bad prospecting, okay? And it's one of the biggest reasons that sales funnels underperform because people are wasting time on bad prospects because you're not using data to find the people that you need to find. And so that's why when you look at data, and so the most important thing, data's hard, right? Because it's all over the place. And so a lot of this stuff is manual. So so everyone wants to use data and everyone wants to do it, but going out to LinkedIn, going out to Google, getting your news alerts, all of that stuff is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And so what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to talk about a consolidated growth signals. And I'm going to talk about these signals that allow you to get very efficient at the top of the funnel. And I'm going to show you how we do it, because the best way to do it is kind of show an example as opposed to trying to just preach to people. Okay? Can everyone see that okay? So I'm going to use an example from Mattermark. So what we do is we identify our top customers, our best customers. And Looker's a great customer for us. We absolutely love them. Okay? And I know a lot of companies are small here, and you all have customers. You don't need to have a lot of customers to find. Those customers could be that you get through referrals, that your VC helped you find, that the founders went out and prospected, but you're always going to have a set of happy customers. And if you have 10 happy customers, it's very likely you're going to eventually have 100 happy customers. So what you need to do is you need to go out and you need to find very specific data about them. So I went out to Looker, right? And I went out and I went to my database and I said, well, what is it about Looker that I know? Well, I know they're B2B SaaS. I know they're in analytics. They're level C funding. They have a growth score of 900. Their last funding was 4 months ago. Okay? And so what I did is I just want to get some data that describes them. And I want to do like a long tail keyword, right? I want to be very specific. I don't want to go wide. I want to find someone that looks exactly like my best customer. Okay, so I know we all talk about volumes, but you really find that awesome customer, find more like it, start doing a search that has parameters exactly like them. Okay, so what I got was this. And this was actually, I just shows the top 4 out of a list of 50. And this is so badass, and I'm going to explain to you why it is. Because if you look at this, what it is, it's companies. If you look at those filters up there, it's the same metrics as Looker. But if you look at the employee count, they're all what they are. They're small versions of Looker with the same exact growth signals. That's awesome. And why that's awesome is because I'm catching them at a point where they're not where Looker is right now, but they have the same exact signal saying they are going in the same exact place. And that's awesome. And what I'm going to do right there, and that has a big cascade effect, right? Because that's why at the top of the funnel, because that cascading effect is going to go all the way to the bottom, because I'm finding super amazing prospects at the top. It's going to flow its way down, and it's going to allow the SDRs to do a better job of setting meetings. And that's why improvements at the top of the funnel are so much more important than improvements anywhere else. It's kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? And so this is just something that we do a lot. We do all the time, and that's what our customers do all the time. And so if you look at this, this list was 50 people. That was only one customer. I multiply that times 10, right? I've got a lot there. I've got a lot with my SDRs to work with, and I'm not wasting the AE's time because I'm sending them good things through. So I've talked a lot about growth. I want to talk about key signals. Okay, and there's a lot of signals that go around. A lot of that is in the growth score, which I'll talk about. But when you talk about high growth SaaS companies, there's 3 things you want to look at. You want to look at funding. You want to look at their employee growth, their head count, and you want to look at that month after month and 6-month change, and you want to look at this growth score. And I'll talk a little bit about the growth score as we go on. But if you think about it, funding, where is it? Are all my customers, are they at Series A? Are they at Series B? Are they late stage? Is my employee headcount, is the value of my product growing as the headcount grows? It seems like it would for everybody, but that's not necessarily the case. A lot of people, they're good at a certain set of employee counts, and then they're not good after that. And you need to be aware of that stuff. And that goes along with the growth score too. Do I want someone who's high flying, or do I want someone as a customer who maintains a status quo? That's really important because not only understanding those signals are hugely important, but how they affect you and how they affect your business. And so let's talk a little bit about funding. Okay? This is a really important graph because it shows you the average time, months, in between when companies get funding. Okay? And companies know when they're getting funding, right? And they start planning for it. I was hired right before as they were going after Series B. I knew Danielle hired me. She's like, this is what we're doing. We're going after our Series B. I want you to ramp up the marketing organization. I want you to ramp up demand gen. I want you to ramp up product marketing and all of that. And so I put my budget together. And there were a few vendors who got in touch with me, and I engaged with them, right? But once we announced our funding, you know how many emails I got? I got 300 emails a day for the next 3 or 4 weeks, right after I announced my funding. And I'll tell you I'll give you the breakdown of what they were. 90% of them were those predictable revenue emails. Has everyone read predictable revenue? Can you please connect me to someone else in your organization? And it's verbatim too. So I just want you to know if you send me one of those things that are verbatim, they're just going to go in my trash. And then the other 9% I get are the jerk emails, right? That when I don't get in touch with them, they end with, well, I guess you just don't care about getting new customers, right? And I save those because when I go and I buy their competitor stuff, I'm going to let them know how much I care. And then I get about 1% of those are really good emails, right? And they're awesome emails, but they get lost in the shuffle because they come to me at a time when I just cannot handle the load. And so understanding and getting in that budget cycle And finding those trends about when someone is ready, a company you're after is about ready to get funding, that's when you want to engage with them. Agree, disagree? Questions?
Don, can you explain when you say, what are the components of a great email for you?
They're short, it's concise. Someone, one person sent me an email, and I tweeted it out because I loved it so much. And he said, Don, it is so hard. And I forget what the subject was. He's so hard doing this. And I really feel for you. And I'm like, yeah, no shit, it's hard, right? And then and then he's just like, and you know what? And then he gave me an example of, we've helped 3 or 4 people raise it like this, and, I would love to discuss it with you. It was short, it was succinct, it was to the point, it empathized with me, right? As soon as he empathized with me, I felt really good. And then he's like, you know what? We did it with these 3 others, and, I would love to talk to you about it. And I sent it right away to my SDR team. I was like, this is great. These are the emails that you should be sending out. These are the emails that I respond to. And those are things important, because the predictable revenue, all those things are really important. But you can't follow just a template, right? You've got to be sincere. I also got an email from someone saying, "Oh, I love your work at Mattermark, and I love that, and I love that blog post you wrote." And I'm like, "All right." But people are trying. I'm joking. People try, and they try their best, and they do good. And I always actually try to answer as many as I can. So let's look at another thing. Let's look at the employee growth. Okay? And I love this. That little red line is about where we got Looker. Okay? And so if you look at Looker, Looker's been growing. And I try to use the same example. I'm trying to use one customer. It's easier. It's more continuity. And we got them right at that red point. And we've been following that growth curve ever since, right? So every time Looker grows and they get new employees, it's more employees that could use our product. It's more they get more departments. We can upgrade them to our enterprise. And so what we really want to do is we want to ride that growth. Growth is a lever, okay? And it's a missed opportunity, and you have to think about it. If you're not getting in, there's this tension, right? Because you get in with a company early on, but what if they go out of business, right? And you're spending all that time and effort, but what if they grow? And so that's what you're trying to do with data. You're trying to understand what's going to grow, because growth is a lever. The earlier you get on, the earlier you get MRR. MRR is monthly. It compounds. It's subscription. It grows. And that's a great thing. And those are the kind of companies you want to find. And so like I said, we've been riding that ever since. And that's a great thing. Okay? The growth score. Oh, forgot about this one. This is a great one. This is something that sometimes you can use, you want to mix signals, right? And so Zach, one of my SDRs, comes to me, and I'm like, well, how do you go and how do you prospect? And he goes, Dawn, when I go and I look and I try to find companies that when they're in their Series B and they get funding, and what they do is I know that at that stage they're trying to build out their sales organization. And so I know that they're probably going to spend that on salespeople, and those salespeople are going to need our data, right? And I'm like, oh, that's very interesting. So I went into the database and I ran some numbers. And so the only constraint I put, this is SaaS. Every chart I put up here is B2B SaaS. I just want you to know that. I'm sorry I didn't mark it here. Oh, actually I did. Apology taken back. So what I did was I ran those numbers and I said, okay, how many people, how many B2B SaaS companies are growing who have gotten funding in the last 9 months or increasing headcount? And they all are. Okay, and they're growing, and a third of them, and half of them are growing at a minimum of 10 to 14%. A third of them are growing to up to 25%, and a good bunch of them are growing 25 and 50%. That's sweet. That's amazing. That's great. That's a profit. Those are signals that say this is an aggregate of the market, but it's a signal telling me that there's growth here, and it's a signal telling me that this is a market to go after. And you can break that down by industry. You can do any of that stuff and look at these numbers. Okay, the growth score. This is just the same Slack email that I sent before. Again, trying to find those. And what's made up of a growth score is 2 things in aggregate. It's called growth and it's called mind share. It assumes that you ship products and that you engage with customers. And the second part of it is that you're getting attention online and that you're retaining it. So while it obviously includes funding and it includes headcount, it's an aggregate of a lot of other signals in the market. It's mobile downloads, it's web traffic, it's social engagement, it's news, it's key personnel. And so what you want to do is you want to go ahead, and so what we do is we take all those signals and we put them together, we run them through an algorithm, and we get a growth score out of it. And so there's a lot of things that you can do. You can go and try to find 100 different signals from 100 different sites, but the key is here is you want to consolidate that into one number. And what we find is that when people can look at a growth score, that there's a strong correlation between a growth score and a qualified meeting. And I'll give you an example of something at Mattermark that has nothing to do with headcount or funding, is our social channels. Okay, we have a huge, our Mattermark Daily has 60,000 people to it. Our corporate Twitter account has 20,000 followers. You add our key personnel, Danielle, our CEO, Alex, our editor, we have over 100,000 people. And so those are huge. You know, they have nothing to do with funding, and they have nothing to do with employee headcount, but they're tremendous levers. They're tremendous, not levers, they're tremendous indicators of growth. So that when we put something out to our social channel, for example, we had the webinar with Jason Lemkin and Danielle. We put that out to our social channels. We did some paid, most of it to our community, and we got 1,300 people registered for it. When we do, you know, we have a sales hacker webinar coming up tomorrow. There's already 600 people, and those are all through leveraging our channels. So it's pretty cool. Is there any questions so far? Making sense to everybody? Okay. Efficiency. So I want to talk a little bit about sales efficiency. In sales, your worst enemy is time and friction. In marketing, your worst enemy is time and friction. Time and friction is just a terrible thing. And what we need to think about, obviously ACV is something that you always want to go up, but what people tend not to think about is their sales velocity. And cutting down the sales cycle is really, really important. And so what you need to think about is not only providing efficiency through your sales cycle, but doing so in a way that gets that sales cycle down. Okay. And then another thing that you want to do, I'm going to kind of go through this really quickly, is you want to prioritize things. And CRMs, does everyone have a CRM here? CRMs they're kind of a trash bin, right? They're either empty or they're full of garbage, right? Because they're really difficult to maintain, right? It's a lot. You're asking a lot to salespeople to do that, and so you need a CRM. They're a necessary evil, but you want to always be. The key about data is not going out there and finding it, but having it part of your daily workflow. You've got to integrate data into everything that you do. And so when you talk about, there's tons of enrichment tools for CRMs, tons of ways to fill those blank spaces in the CRM. And I highly suggest that you do it. And you know, the very first hire that I had was an operations person. There's no one better than operations, because there's nothing worse than dirty systems. And there's nothing worse than not being able to track your efficiency through your CRM. So I'm going to go past that a little bit. So, and prioritizing here also comes through, and this is also something that I ran that hopefully everyone will find interesting here, is I ran growth scores by B2B SaaS industries. And really the phenomenal thing is I ran it in aggregate, and customer support was nowhere to be seen. It wasn't anywhere. And then all of a sudden I ran it just for B2B SaaS companies, and all of a sudden it just pops up to the top of the list. And these kinds of things are fascinating because you don't know until you start running the numbers, until you start looking at the growth. So these are great ways to prioritize. So you can go in, you can slice, dice, and you prioritize, and you look at the growth. And that's really, really important, and it's really, really fascinating. And I also ran, and I don't have it up here, but I can give it to anyone who wants it. I also ran it on region. And what I did was I ran both a mind share and a growth score. And as you would expect in the San Francisco region, the New York, and the LA, as well as Austin, you had these really big spikes of venture capital, especially in the Bay Area. But when you took away the funding, it really kind of evened out when you just talked about mind share and you took rid of the funding and the employee count. And so that's really fascinating that, you know, you get this bump in the Bay Area with funding, but, you know, good sales and good marketing and good operations, it starts to even its way out in the mind share. And I can go and get that for everybody, but I didn't put it up there. I wasn't necessarily sure of the outcome on that. I'll tell you one thing. This is something that I always preach at Mattermark. Growth is in your customer funnel. Growth is in your customer funnel all the time. It's there, okay? The green bar are the fastest growing companies. The red bar are the slowest growing companies. And you'll find that the fastest growing companies get more of their ACV, a percentage of their ACV through upsells. And so there's your best friend is going to be your customer success. Everyone talks about this relationship between marketing and sales. It absolutely is important. But in a SaaS world, there's a third person to the party, and that is customer success. And I want to talk a little bit about that. Okay? Because customer success helps you, using growth signals, helps you identify your VIP customers. Okay? So this is kind of a difficult one to read. This is from DigitalOcean. This is another great customer of ours. I love DigitalOcean. Love them like I love Looker. And it's because they do really great things. And they do something that's, I think everyone should do at every level, at every function. We do this at Mattermark, is you need to combine behavioral data with growth signals, with market data, okay? Otherwise, you get an incomplete picture. I can't stress this enough, okay? Because it doesn't matter. It's like lead scoring, right? I don't care if someone is coming to my product webinars. I don't care if they're reading my stuff. I care a little bit. But if they're not growing, or they just laid off a bunch of people, or they can't, they have no way of buying, they have no capability of buying my product, then I'm wasting my time. But if you sit there and you base everything on behavior, that person looks like a great fit. And so you've really got to start painting complete pictures by using growth signals and behavioral data. And this is what DigitalOcean does. They're super sophisticated in that they take all of their information, they take how you use the product data, they take upsells and renewals and invoice amounts, and then they combine it with mind share, growth score, mind share, and funding to understand who their VIP customers are. They segment and they understand and they use that to predict who's going to buy and who's going to be their most important customers. Because you never give all of your customers equal time. You give your most important, your most profitable customers the time. And so when you sit there and you can take those growth signals from the market and you can mix it in with your behavioral data, you have a gold mine there. And that's something that DigitalOcean does very well. And it's something that, pretty much it's not that hard to copy. It's pretty cool. And like I said, we did that with our HubSpot. We took and we said, this behavioral data isn't giving us enough stuff. It's not giving us enough good information. It's giving our quality of MQLs isn't where it needs to be. And we're only a 50-person company, and Mattermark is the size of most of you out here, maybe just a little bit bigger. But we combined that data, and when we took that, we saw that our MQLs went down 33%, but our close rate doubled, because all of a sudden our SDRs were passing companies they actually could buy, because we were using growth signals in addition to behavioral data. And I can't stress how important enough that is. Okay? After MRR, your most important metric is churn. Okay? Churn is super important. Negative, the greater the negative churn, the greater your pre-money valuation. That stuff is super important. And so what you need to do is you need to use growth signals to not only identify the high VIP customers, but you need to find the ones that are on the verge of churning, so that you can reach out to them. And that could be due just to market conditions. And so you also want to use growth signals not to identify the good, but to identify the bad. And so this is something that DigitalOcean did, not only on the VIP customer side, but also to understand which of those VIP customers were about to churn. And they were able to lower their monthly churn rate to under 1%. And that's pretty awesome. And so I want to kind of close. I just wanted to start it with those examples because we have about 10 minutes left. But people ask about the state of the B2B market. It's good. It's really good. And, people get nervous and funding is down. But, as Jason Lumpkin says, the public SaaS companies are blowing it out of the water. The customer markets are there. It's just about using growth signals to identify those and to find those customers. And this is just a little DigitalOcean's going to be at the Sales Hacker webinar tomorrow. If anyone's interested, they're going to be talking all about that little use case I gave. So I kind of just put that up. They're going to be going. So thank you. Does anyone have any questions?